all during the several months that we worked on the deal. But when it came down to the end, if things didn't fall apart, you know, everybody was working towards the same goal, and I liked that.
All right. Before becoming an attorney, Dean Stacie Stewart spent 15 years working as a teacher and administrator for the Cache County School District in North Logan, Utah. She obtained her undergraduate degree in English and master's degree in educational leadership from Utah State University. While working on her master's degree, she took a class titled Legal Issues in Education that provided the original spark for her interest in attending law school. With the support of her husband and 4 children, Dean Stewart graduated magna cum laude from the J. Reuben Clark Law School at Brigham Young University. During her time as a BYU Law student, she was the managing editor of administration for the BYU Law Review and the president of BYU's Women in Law. Following graduation, Dean Stewart continued her efforts to promote opportunities for women in the legal profession as a member of the board of the Women Lawyers of Utah. After law school, Dean Stewart clerked for the Honorable Judge Andrew J. Kleinfeld of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit in Fairbanks, Alaska, and then for the Honorable Judge Ted Stewart of the U.S. District Court for the District of Utah in Salt Lake City. She then entered private practice in the commercial real estate section of Parr, Brown, Gee & Lovelace in Salt Lake City. Please help me in welcoming our guest, Dean Stacie Stewart.
All right. See if I can just maybe hit it on my pocket there. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. This is just great to see so many people here on this, Monday afternoon. So I got Dan questions he said that he generally gets from pre-law students. And so I put this presentation together specifically to answer those questions. But I am happy to stay afterwards, answer your specific questions. I brought some materials specific to BYU and the BYU Law School. When I say specific to BYU, there's a handout that says Preparing for Law School, and on the back of it, there's some recommended pre-law courses. They're BYU courses because we work on that with BYU's pre-law, but those types of classes, I think they offer anywhere. So you could figure out what those classes were at Utah State. But I'm just gonna go ahead and dive in. But again, excited to be here and excited to be an Aggie. I must say, I do have split loyalties. Although I'm happy that the Aggies now have a really good football team since BYU, well, we just won't talk about that. So here are the questions that Dan said were foremost on people's minds when they're looking to go to law school. Preparing for law school, being a competitive applicant, how to choose a law school, skills needed for law school, and what we call character and fitness issues, meaning, if you have a criminal record or you have things in your past that you're like, I don't know if I can be a lawyer. So a lot of students say, what is the right major for law school? What is the major that if I pick, I am going to get in? So our class that we admitted last year to BYU, there were 51 different majors. Everything from piano performance to chemical engineering to accounting, people with PhDs in biochemistry, masters of business administration. I just like to tell students, pick something you love and be awesome at it, because the law touches every aspect of society. And it may very well be that that thing that you love will correspond to a field of law. Some of our musicians are really interested in copyright and they want to protect works of art. Some people who are in the sciences want to do want to be a patent lawyer. They want to be an in-house lawyer for like a tech company. So if you've kind of got dreams or aspirations of law in a certain field, certainly undergrad in that field would help. But law school is its own thing. You learn how to do law by going to law school, and you don't necessarily have to have all of the background to practice in a certain field. So as was mentioned, when I graduated from law school, I had 15 years of experience working in public education. And I thought that I would be an education lawyer. That's just what I thought I would do, because that was, my background, that's where my connections were. And when I went to the law school, I never took a single class on education law because there were so many other things that were so cool and interesting. And so when I finished, I ended up going to work for a couple different judges because I thought, oh, you know, one of my favorite things in law school to do was the mock trial, the moot court things where you just go and argue and you write your brief and you get it just so. And so I really loved doing that. So I thought, well, I'm going to be a litigator. I'm going to be a trial lawyer. And so I went to work for a couple of judges. And by the time I finished my second clerkship, I thought, you know, being a trial lawyer is way more fun to me in law school than it is in real life. And so I decided I wanted to do something different. Now, I have friends that are trial attorneys and love it. You know, you just kind of find that thing in the law that really fits your personality and your skill set. So when I went into private practice, I ended up working in commercial real estate. Real estate attorneys never go to court. I went to court once. I made one appearance because I had a client who had a big piece of property up by Bear Lake, and it was owned in this trust, and the grandfather who was the trustee had died, and he had not nominated a successor trustee, so we had to go to court to get the court to nominate his son as the successor trustee. So went to court, said this is what needs to happen. The judge said, anybody opposed? Wasn't anybody? Granted. So I've got a 100% win rate in the probate court in Salt Lake City. So the thing that I liked about real estate law was if the deal came together, there was no winners and no losers. So we would all go to dinner together, the people that sold the property, the people that bought the property, and everybody was happy. Now, it was really fierce negotiation all during the several months that we worked on the deal. But when it came down to the end, if things didn't fall apart, you know, everybody was working towards the same goal. And I liked that. Now, like I said, I have friends that are, you know, very successful trial attorneys, and all that adrenaline gets running for them when they're in it to win it. So that might be your personality. So you don't have to decide before you go to law school what kind of lawyer you want to be, and it doesn't have to be the kind of lawyer that matches your undergrad. But sometimes that happens. A lot of accounting students end up being tax lawyers. A lot of students who do, you know, constitutional law or criminal justice, maybe they end up being prosecutors or defense attorneys, but still wide open. And even when you get into practice, I knew people at my firm who would start in one practice area and then would change to something else because they thought, well, I want to do something different. To me, a law degree is a broadening graduate degree. There are not very many graduate degrees that qualify you to work in a broader range of fields. So when I got my master's in education, it was so I could do different jobs in education. It wasn't so I could do something else. But when I got my law degree, it was specifically so that I would be qualified to do something somewhere outside of education. So the first thing, if I was to put this on the timeline, pick that subject you love, be awesome at it, because every law school is looking for awesome students, no matter what it is you're awesome at. The next thing is get involved. So if it's something you love, you know, be a teaching assistant, be a research assistant, get involved with the student clubs that pertain to that major. You know, do all those kinds of things, because that, when you put it on your resume, shows that you're intellectually curious. It shows that you're somebody who will get involved, who wants to be part of a broader community. And also, you'll end up having closer relationships with professors and advisors and people who can write you a letter of recommendation. And so that's something that's going to be important to your application. And I guarantee you, you will get a better letter from somebody who you have worked with, who you've, you know, aced their class, rather than somebody that you ask the week before you need it to write you a letter. They will give you just a fine letter. And we read hundreds of these. And there are the letters that could have anybody's name on them. And once I even read one where the find and replace did not work, and it was somebody's name through the first page and somebody else's name through the second page. Very sad. We didn't hold that against them. That wasn't their fault. But it might have been their fault that they got a cookie cutter letter instead of a more personalized letter. So that's why I say get involved. Prepare for and take the LSAT. BYU and some other schools take other tests. We also take the GRE. There are some schools that even take the GMAT for students who might be doing like a JD MBA. But make sure you take time and study for the test, because most law schools weigh the LSAT very, very heavily, and they do it because there's a lot of research behind the LSAT as a predictor of first-year law school grades. That's all it predicts. Does not predict how awesome of an attorney you're going to be, doesn't predict how much money you're going to make, doesn't predict a lot of things, but it is a fair predictor of first-year law school grades, which is why law schools care about it. And LSAT scores, because they've been norm referenced over years and years and years, are comparable across administrations, whereas majors and grades, they're just harder to compare. So every law school is going to look at your LSAT and is going to weigh that a little more heavily than your GPA. So finally, prepare, and this, I know this goes maybe without saying, prepare a free application. Have somebody else read it. You know, I was an English major, and one of the many things we were told when we were taught to edit and when I was a writing TA, you know, read it out loud. Have somebody else read it, because you will self-check yourself, and there will be errors there that you yourself will never catch. And you don't want us to catch them. That's not the first person you want to get an error in your personal statement or your resume. And then I would say apply early. And BYU and many schools that do rolling admissions, there is a slight advantage to applying early. Now students will ask me, they'll say, okay, I took the LSAT in the summer, I didn't do awesome, I'm going to take it again in the fall, so should I just apply now with my not great score, or should I apply in, you know, early in the spring or in the winter when I might have a better LSAT score? That's kind of a judgment call. I would say apply the earliest you can with the best application. Because yeah, just because your application's in first doesn't mean that you're going to get in above, you know, a number of other well-qualified students. But when we do rolling admissions, what it means is that first group of students that we look at, 70, 80, 100 students in the pool for comparison, and we'll pick some out and admit them. And by the time you get to the end, by the priority deadline and the final deadline, there are hundreds. There's, you know, 400 or 500 students in that pool. So you're competing against far more people with a school that does rolling admissions if you apply late. Students, as long as I get it in by the priority deadline, I'm good. Problem is, we have been admitting people since November. So I looked this last year, we only admitted 14 people after the priority deadline last year because almost all of the slots were full. So that's just how it kind of goes with the school that does rolling admissions. If they just take all of them and then make a decision at one point, then it won't be the same thing. But that would be my suggestion if they do rolling admissions. All right, so as far as being a competitive applicant, this is a little bit of rehash, but just so you know, the law schools aren't being super arbitrary about the LSAT. The ABA standard 501B that, you know, is required of all ABA accredited law schools just says a law school will only admit someone who appears to be capable of satisfactorily completing the program of legal education and being admitted to the bar. And again, LSATs only predict first-year grades, but we have found nationwide that there is a correlation between an extraordinarily low LSAT, like when I say extraordinarily low, like 148 and below. LSATs that low typically have a harder time passing the bar. And so a lot of schools, while I don't know any school that has like an arbitrary cutoff, we certainly have admitted students with LSATs in the 140s before, but LSATs that low, because if you're admitting people that don't have a fair chance of passing the bar, you're potentially in violation of this standard. So I know some students just hate the LSAT and they're like, oh, why do you do that? So students ask me all of the time. They say, all right, so is this just a numbers game? You know, I'm just one number to you. Our dean, who I think has a really great sense of humor, if a student says to him, I'm just a number to you, he's like, no, you're two numbers. Your LSAT and your GPA. He's kidding, but people want to know how law schools use LSATs and GPAs. I will tell you how BYU uses them. I have friends that work at other law schools. My director used to work at UNLV, and I talk to the folks at Utah all the time. Almost everybody I've talked to does something similar, if not almost exactly the same as this. your academic numbers put you in a pool of candidates, and you compete against others in that pool for a slot. So the different groups, the different pools, our students have both numbers, their LSAT and GPA, above that school's medians. Then if you have an LSAT above, a GPA below, a GPA above, an LSAT below, or both numbers below. It's just a sorting mechanism. All schools admit students from all of those buckets. So if both of your numbers are below, you don't have to say, oh, forget it, I'm never getting in there. But you should just realize it's going to be harder to get in from that bucket for that school, and I'll tell you why. So while we admit people from all of the different buckets, this is kind of what admissions committees think when they look at those different buckets. If there's both numbers above, there's a strong presumption that that student is academically qualified to succeed in that law school's program, and that bucket will have the highest acceptance rate of the students in that bucket. It's not 100%. It is not like a sure thing, slam dunk. But you've got a really good chance. You pick a school, you've got both numbers above, you've got an excellent chance of being admitted to that school. Because, like I said, Standard 501B says we should have confidence that you can successfully complete the program. A lot of schools feel like their medians are kind of a proxy for the difficulty of their curriculum. And so if you've got academic numbers above that median, then a school can say to the ABA, hey, so this person had these great academic credentials, so we in good faith admitted them because, just because they dropped out and didn't pass the bar, we still did our due diligence as far as being an ABA accredited law school. The interesting thing is both numbers above is the lowest matriculation rate. So best chance of getting in, lowest chance you will probably pick that school because you have so many great options. So for us, students who are both numbers above for us, they're also getting into schools like Northwestern and Chicago and Harvard and Columbia, okay? And so some of the students pick to go to some of those schools rather than to BYU. The LSAT above, GPA below, again, there is a presumption that the student is academically qualified to succeed in the program. Again, there's a high acceptance rate and a moderate matriculation rate. So we get a fair number of the students who apply, who we admit, who are above our median LSAT, below in GPA. And again, since the LSATs are looked on by the law schools as slightly more weighty, that would be the second highest acceptance rate. So then GPA above, LSAT below, again, a presumption, you've got good grades, you've worked on that very hard over a long period of time, you are qualified. The acceptance rate is a little bit lower because we typically, at least for BYU, have a lot more students with high GPAs than with high LSATs, and our GPA median is really quite high. But there is a high matriculation rate. So a lot of those students that get in for us will come to BYU. Finally, both numbers below, depending on how the numbers fall out, if they're very close to the median, that's probably good enough. But if one of them is extremely low, then there's got to be some kind of evidence that the student is still qualified to be successful in law school. And that could be work experience on your resume. It could be awesome letters of recommendation. It could be a variety of things. It could just be an amazing personal statement that, wow, that's just like the best writing and the most interesting thing we've ever read. But the tricky thing about this one is it has the highest matriculation rate. So like 80% of our students who we admit in that number range choose BYU. And so I just explained this to you because students who say are on our wait list, who have both numbers below, they'll often be like, well, how do I know if somebody's going to drop out? I'm like, well, I can't tell you, but I can tell you that students in that same pool as you rarely drop out, because those kind of more like their reach school, their dream school. Okay, so questions about this. I know I've probably just blown your whole mind right now, just, exposed law school admissions.
So does BYU, do you guys, there's a certain amount of availability for the new class for each of these boxes? Will you?
Yeah, so this is a really good question.
So people drop out, the both numbers below, you were just saying, if you're on the wait list, would you be on the wait list for technically that box of that group?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a really good question. And it's because law schools, sadly, are somewhat beholden to the rankings of U.S. News and World Report, which your LSAT and GPA medians factor somewhat into. You know, law schools aren't super keen on plummeting in their medians. And so one way that law schools kind of keep their medians the same is having certain slots for certain students, because then the medians don't change. Or else they go up if you just happen to have more students with high LSATs apply. Okay? So we have about so many slots based on resources, based on a lot of different things. But we can't keep the same medians if we admit all of the students below the median, right? And so a lot of times if somebody's on the wait list, they will have to wait for somebody in that puzzle piece to drop for them to have an opportunity to get in. So that's a good question. All right, yes, sir.
When you're rolling admissions, do you guys have like certain once a month review those? Or are you constantly doing it? And then let's say you apply and in November you do that rolling admissions and you don't get accepted. Do you just keep going and going until in March you get that?
Yeah, that's also a good question. So different schools do it different ways. But the way that we do it is we open our applications at the beginning of September. Our first committee meeting is not until October. And then we meet once a month, October, November, December, and we accept some students during that time. And some students actually will be denied during that time. And some students will be invited to the wait list during that time. So whatever your decision is final for that cycle. So if you are denied, then you're denied for that cycle. If you're on the wait list, then you kind of are still in consideration as the process moves forward. And if you're admitted, then it's not like we see who we get next and decide if we still want to admit you. You are admitted regardless of what happens after that.
You should know either wait list, denied, or accepted by about a month after.
Yeah, so our auto email that goes out after people apply says 4 to 6 weeks. So after we get their application. All right. So the only reason I torture you with the bucket analogy is, number one, I think it kind of helps you see how schools use those numbers. Because once you get in that bucket, the numbers are actually not as important, which I think is kind of cool, because it means that somebody with 1 point higher than the LSAT is likely not going to get in over you, right? Unless that 1 point happens to put them over the school's median, okay? So for us, our median LSAT is a 164. Our median GPA from this last cycle was a 3.82. So if somebody has a 163 and somebody else has a 161, it doesn't make that much difference because they're in the same general pool. Now, if somebody has 164 and somebody has 163, they're in different pools. Now, if you have like a 140, you're still in that pool, but you are not going to be as competitive as the person with the 163 who's in that pool. I mean, I just think that's kind of common sense. But generally speaking, the margin of error on the LSAT is supposed to be 3 points either way. So generally speaking, in those pools, there's not those arbitrary cutoffs like, oh, this person has like 200ths better on their GPA, oh, we should take them, you know? Or this person got an A in logic and that person got an A minus in logic, oh, let's take the A, you know? Once you're in that bucket, it is a holistic approach based on your entire application. And I feel like that is just more fair. I also feel the bucket thing is fair because we had an applicant last year that had a 180 on the LSAT and a 3.99 GPA in electrical engineering. So who wants to compete against that guy? You know, nobody. And so it's good that he's in this other bucket, you know, and then everybody's in their own bucket. Because then you're comparing like situated folks. Okay? So you might still not think it's fair, but that's okay. So when students come in to me and just say, so what is one thing I can do to increase my chances of getting into law school? I'll explain the buckets and say, get in the best bucket you can for the school that you want to go to. And that might be retaking the LSAT. That might be if you're a sophomore and your grades are kind of you know, just really work on bringing that GPA up. So just depends. Once you get like baked, Like, this is my GPA, it's not moving. Like, if you're an older applicant like me, I had been out of school for a long time when I applied to law school. And I was like, dang, I wish I could go back, and I wish I would have thought that I was going to go to law school when I was an undergrad, but I didn't. So my GPA was definitely below the median. But, you know, it was what it was, and at that point, the best thing I could do to get in a different bucket was just to do well on the LSAT. So after that, take time to put together a good application. And I've said this several times. I am just so surprised. Me and my director read all of the applications that we get at BYU, and then our admissions committee that has law professors that rotate on and off. They all also read the applications, but we divide them up between the professors, so both of us read them and at least one of the professors reads them. And so having read now hundreds and hundreds of applications, I am so surprised. I am just so surprised by the errors that I see from really smart people. So, and then follow up with schools where you have the most interest, because there is a little piece to admissions that's like dating. You like people who like you. So, you know, you don't really want to ask someone out when you know the answer will be unequivocally no. So just because, you know, BYU or any other school, it's your top school, that is not enough to get you in, right? But if we're considering a pool of applicants and they're all kind of roughly the same and have these great applications, you know, and it's not ever apples to apples, it's like apples to grapes to kumquats, but, you know, all equally impressive in their own right, and there's somebody that's like, yeah, I really want to go to BYU. I mean, that goes somewhere with those of us who work there and think BYU is awesome. You know, I laugh when somebody comes in and they want to talk to me about law school, and then they're just like, yeah, well, BYU is like my total fallback plan, you know. If I don't get into T14, I'll apply to BYU. I'm like, okay, we like you too. So, because like I said, all things being equal, you know, sometimes there is a little edge or a little plus to somebody's like, yeah, I really want to go to your school. And here's why. Like, you have this awesome professor, or you have this great program, or this great internship, or, you know, I want to practice in this, you know, specialty, or I want to practice in the area where your law school is. You know, that's something that matters. Yes, sir.
Are those the type of things you see in someone's application, though?
You know, we actually have a question that says, why do you want to go to BYU?
And that's just in your application, not like in a personal statement?
No, some people will put at the end of their personal statement, you know, BYU is my top choice or whatever. We just have a little section. I know there are several schools that either have optional statements or they have it in their application. Because I've read a lot of applications. A lot of them are just like, why this? You know, why the U? Why Notre Dame? Like, why do you want us? And I've already looked at applications this cycle, and it's just like a text box. You can only 1,000 characters max, and several people haven't even bothered to fill it out. Why do you want to go to BYU? Blank. I'm like, okay, I guess you have no good reasons. All right. All right, so how to choose a law school. So one of the most important things actually about most law schools is location. And that is because most law schools are regional, and they serve the areas where they are. And that is where you're going to develop a lot of your professional connections. You'll get to do internships and different things like that. So that is not a 100%, you know, true statement for every single person that goes to law school anywhere, but for the vast majority of people who go to regional law schools. So for instance, at the U, 90% of the students at the U stay in Utah to practice. At ASU, 90% of the students who go to ASU stay in Phoenix to practice, or that surrounding area. UNLV, same thing. You know, most of their students stay in the Vegas metro area. And when I practiced in Salt Lake, probably 40% of the lawyers were BYU Law grads, 40% of them were U Law grads, and the other 20% were everywhere else. And a lot of, like, you know, top law schools, right? At my firm, it was like BYU in Utah, and then it was like Harvard and Yale and Cornell and Northwestern and Columbia and Chicago. I mean, there were a few regional law schools, but not a ton. I mean, considering how close we are to other regional law schools, there weren't a tremendous amount in Salt Lake City. So here I've got a picture of like big city, small town. So some of it also depends on where you want to practice. You know, if you want to be in a big city versus if you want to be somewhere more small and more rural. And we'll talk a little bit more about that because that factors into cost as well. If you want to work in government, you know, you might want to go to DC. If you want to work in tech, you might want to go to Silicon Valley. Now, there are a lot of schools that have, you know, study abroad programs, that have semester away programs and different things like that. So those are things you would definitely want to research. So for instance, BYU has a semester in DC. We have a semester in London that you can do from the law school to kind of, you know, make those connections. And BYU, even though it is size and location more like a regional law school, because so many students come from all over the nation, all over the world, actually, and most we have go to Boston and Dallas and Houston and San Francisco and LA and all kinds of places. I have a little map back there if you want to see where the last 4 years of grads have gone. The next thing is, what do you want to practice? So if you want to practice immigration law, you might want to go somewhere that you can work with immigrants. You know, somewhere in the West is probably going to be better than, you know, I don't know, maybe like Tennessee or something, you know. Somewhere near the border, you know, probably has a clinic. So things like that. Same, I put criminal law, family law. Family law is all state law, and so it's very localized. And if you want to do like deals, if you want to do big time corporate stuff, you know, New York or Delaware, you would want to look for connections to those markets. And then I put the ship up because I had somebody ask me, we got an email inquiry about if BYU had a maritime law program. I was like, no, we do not teach maritime law. Sadly, you will probably need to go somewhere near water to study maritime law. So those are all things to think about when you decide where you want to apply to law school. And finally, the cost. And this is going to tie in to both what you want to do and where you want to live. Because some law schools might do a better job of getting you a high-paid, you know, high-powered legal job in a really big market. And that might be worth paying for. But if, you know, you don't want that kind of job, if you want to be a family lawyer in a small town, you don't want to spend a ton of money on law school because it's going to take you a long time to pay it back. Now, there's lots of things if you have federal loans where you can do loan forgiveness and different things like that. But, you know, I mean, just my general advice to students is really consider how much student debt you want to take on and consider where you want to practice and how much money you're going to make and what kind of work you want to do, because that's going to be a whole range. Public interest, government work pays less than private practice, big city law firms. Just do. All right. So there you go. Don't forget those three things. When you're thinking about where you want to go to law school, make sure you think about the location, what you want to do with your law degree, and the cost. All right, so the best law students. I have students that come to me all the time and say, I love to argue. Everybody says I should be a lawyer. That's just like a small piece of what lawyers do. Lawyers mostly read and write and do research. So for every, you know, hour a lawyer spends arguing in court, they probably spent dozens of hours reading discovery, reading cases, drafting a brief. I had a student that came to visit with me, and she was a psychology major, and she said, you know, I wanted to do a PhD in psychology. I wanted to be like a therapist. I said, okay, well, that sounds like a good profession. She said, but you know what? Like, I started looking into those programs, and you've got to do, like, it's not meeting people. You've got to do, like, all this research. Like, you've got to read stuff and then write it up. And she's like, so I'm not going to do that. I just thought maybe I'd do law instead. And I just thought, whoa, I don't think what lawyers really do, because that's mainly what you do, is reading, writing, listening, some speaking. And, when students get the comment, oh, you're really great at arguing, you should be a lawyer, sometimes that says, you're really good at just like arguing what you believe in, okay? The best lawyers understand both sides and can actually argue either side persuasively. You don't know who's going to hire you. You might actually be hired to defend a position that wouldn't be your first position, and not something that's like, completely immoral or something like that, but just like, yeah, if I was to pick sides, I wouldn't be on this side, but that's who's paying you. And you need to do the very best job that you can do, regardless of what side you're on. That's your ethical duty as an attorney. All right, character and fitness. I actually think this is a really cool story. I hope this works. So we have a student that graduated, not this year, but the previous year, who had actually served time in federal prison for drug crimes. And so there's just a short little interview with him, because he is now BYU Law grad and practicing lawyer. So, except, uh-oh, I can't hear him. So, okay. So it's, yes, unmuted. Well, it says, let's see, unmute is on. So let's see. That. Let me see if the volume on the actual, there we go.
Told me that he felt like 96 months in prison was appropriate for me. And that night I stayed after to ask him some questions about the class. And after asking the questions and was talking about the subject matter, he looked at me and asked me, how are you? And I thought to myself, I'm fine, I'm good. But then after I left, I drove home, and I thought about it a little more. And I thought, I'm actually really good, because of the way my life is going now, compared to how it could have been going with all of the problems that I caused myself. I got pretty lucky with how everything panned out. Having him ask that made me really think and reflect on things.
So, it is not, I think if Ben Aldana can get admitted to law school, I think most people have a shot. But that being said, one thing that he did before he even applied is he talked to the Utah State Bar, because it's not the law school that determines whether or not you're fit for admission to the bar, it is the bar. And while we try to screen, for issues where somebody might not be allowed to be admitted to a bar in a certain jurisdiction, he had talked to the Utah Bar, basically said, here's where I am, here's where I've been, this is what's going on with me. And they said, okay, well, we're not going to say that's an absolute bar to you being admitted. So you see if you can get into law school somewhere, and we'll go from there. And so he kept working with the bar all during law school to make sure that he would be able to sit for the bar exam and to get admitted to practice. And so, yeah, he now works in Utah County, I think as a prosecutor, interestingly enough. So, that being said, make sure you fully disclose on your application everything, okay? The Utah Bar is actually really pretty sticky. I had to disclose every speeding ticket I had ever gotten, which I was older when I applied to law school. I was like, oh, dude, that was 15 years ago. And I had to go track them down, the different jurisdictions, and turn them in. And so it's always better to over-disclose than to under-disclose. So if you've got, juvenile charges for vandalism or curfew or whatever, just throw them on there. Just yep, yes. Because it's much better to disclose and to explain than it is for you to get called in the dean's office. We had this happen over the last few years. Somebody called in and said, hey, we heard that you da 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 da. Is that true? Yes. You disclose that on your application? No. And we did have a student who was dismissed from the law school for not fully disclosing past issue on their application. So after you're admitted, work closely with the bar in your jurisdiction to make sure, whatever hoops they want you to jump through, to make sure whatever you got to do so that you can practice law when you graduate from law school is done. So, all right. So, you didn't ask for this, but I have a captive audience. So my last couple slides are like, why BYU? All right. Thank you for your patience. So I don't even know where to start. There's like so many awesome things about BYU Law. So I just picked out a few. So one thing is that we have a new initiative where one of our former deans, when I was at the law school, he always said law is a leadership degree. And while I knew a lot of leaders in the community that had law degrees, it's not like they teach you how to be a leader in law school. So we decided we would do that. So we have leadership training. We have students who are selected as student leaders who are on a leadership council where they work with emerging leaders in certain fields, with some of our alums who are leaders in certain fields. They get a nice fellowship, like a $10,000 fellowship to be part of this program. There's also leadership colloquia where we have really amazing leaders from all across the United States that come and participate in the colloquia. So we are inspiring leadership at BYU Law. The second thing, innovation. So if you Google innovation at BYU Law, all kinds of cool things will come up because we're considered one of the 20 most innovative law schools. You would think law school and innovation would be an oxymoron since a lot of it is the same. And you're reading cases that your grandfather read. A lot of them are the same, but one thing that's rapidly changing and one thing that we're at least doing is using technology to improve access to justice. So we have a lab that's called the LawX Legal Design Lab. And the purpose of LawX is for students to identify an access to justice problem and then try to solve it using technology. So the first product produced by LawX 2 years ago was a piece of software called SoloSuit throughout Utah. But what it is the students in LawX did a research project and found out that 90% of all the people who are sued for debt collection in Utah default, meaning they lose because they never show up. And so they thought, wow, and this was tens of thousands of cases. So they said, hey, we're going to interview some of these people who are sued for debt collection. They must be a bunch of deadbeats. And they found out, no, typically they were people that had like terrible accidents, cancer, health problems, lost jobs, and they were unable to make, their rent payment or something. And so they borrowed money from, a payday lender or some other place, where they could just get an unsecured loan. And then, things didn't turn around and a $500 or $1,000 loan, they end up getting behind on, and pretty soon they owe $2,000, and then they get sued for debt collection. They don't know what to do. And so they lose by default, and then they owe $2,000 plus $1,500 in attorney's fees and court costs, because if you lose, you have to pay the other person. So they said, you know what, we kind of feel bad for some of these people who have these terrible things happen to them. And so they said, what needs to happen is this software needs to be able to produce something that somebody who gets sued for debt collection can turn into the court that is legally sufficient to be an answer, so that they don't have to hire a lawyer to answer for them so they don't lose. So as long as you answer, you don't necessarily lose by default. But if you just don't do anything, you lose by default. And so you can if you get served a summons for debt collection, you can go to SoloSuit, you can enter in all of your information and go through this questionnaire, and it will actually produce an answer that you can file in the court. It won't pay the whatever, I don't know what the filing fee is for you, and you can't file it electronically, but you can print it out and you could take it there so that you don't lose. So this last year, they worked with the University of Arizona for a different product to help reduce the number of evictions. And it was a completely different model. It's actually called Hello Landlord. And it is just a communication platform for landlords and tenants to use, because they found a lot of people were getting evicted, not because they were completely unable to pay their rent, but because they got a couple days behind. The landlord hadn't heard from them. The landlord got scared, so served them a 3-day pay or vacate notice, and then it's like, oh, you know, what's going on? And so they found that communication would help people stay in their homes and would help landlords have assurance that they weren't, you know, losing out on all this rent. Somebody was, you know, trashing and leaving their apartment. So 2 completely different problems, completely student-driven. We have a lawyer who is a legal designer who actually teaches the class, and then he has an IBM programmer that comes in to help the class to the extent that they're, you know, to help them design whatever the software is. So that is Law X. We also have a speaker series called The Future of Law, where we bring in people just talking about, you know, can robots replace people? Intelligence go to like reading legal cases and summarizing them, different things like that. We also have a legal technology initiative that's free to our students, where you get access to all the major legal software, including like, you know, Word and Excel and all that, but also like discovery software that you would use if you were working in a law firm doing discovery. And then you can learn and get certificates on using those software in legal, for legal uses. So evidently there was a CEO of a big company who said, I want to know how good my outside counsel is with technology. And so he sent out a survey and had them just all fill it out. And he's like, everybody failed miserably. He's like, lawyers do not know how to use technology. Like, they may know the law, but they do not know how to use software. And so he put together with some other people this legal technology assessment. And so we have the assessment free for students, and then you can take classes that allow you to gain certification in these different legal technologies, which I think is super cool. We also started doing academies, which you'll hear people say, oh, I went to law school, but I didn't learn how to be a lawyer in law school. I learned how to be a lawyer when I practiced. That's why it's called practice. So at the end of your first year at BYU, if you want to apply to be in one of our academies, it is a 1-week boot camp right after your first year, and it just puts you with practitioners to teach you how to do a certain field of law. So we have Trial Academy, where top litigators from all over the United States come and just work with you on a mock trial problem all week long, 12-hour days, like, this is how you do it. No, don't do it this way, do it this way. And then we have Deals Academy. We sent 12 students to New York last year, where they went through an M&A simulation with junior partners and senior associates at Kirkland & Ellis, which is a big law firm in New York City. And next year, we're starting Startup Academy in Silicon Valley and Appellate Academy in DC with the same model, just getting like immersed in like real life boot camp in a certain area of law for a week in the summer. Doesn't cost you anything. You also don't get credit. It's just practical experience. So as I mentioned, we place students nationally and internationally. I have more detail about that on some of our handouts, both in internships, jobs, and clerkships. And BYU has incredibly low tuition. Whether you are a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints or whether you're not, the tuition is still crazy low. Students who are members of the church pay less because the church subsidizes that tuition. But since the church subsidizes the law school, tuition for students who are not members is about $26,000, which a lot of schools, I mean, particularly top-tier private schools, are $50,000 and $60,000 a year. So I will say another thing I've noticed about BYU is just it's a very collegial community. If you talk to our law students, they actually love it at BYU. And you just can't go everywhere and have law students be like, I love it here. You know, we're very competitive. People say, I've heard BYU is the most competitive law school there is because you guys don't drink, all you do is study. I'm like, well, I don't know if that's true, but okay. So students are very competitive and they are very driven, but I feel like if they're all running a race against each other, they will cheer for you no matter where you end up, and they're not going to trip you on the way to the finish line. They're not going to hide the book so you can't do the assignment. You know, they're not going to turn off your alarm so you don't go to the final or whatever. It's just a really collegial group. Everybody wants everybody to do well. So that is my short spiel on that. You know, I'll probably know where we are, and I'm happy to take questions, and that is that for my presentation. Yes, sir.
Do you guys have any programs or goals set in place to help your students prepare for the bar?
Yes, this is a good question. And I just have to announce bar results came out. 94% of BYU Law students who just graduated passed the bar. That means we had 4 students that did not pass, so which I thought was pretty dang amazing. So what we do is we have started in the last few years what we call an academic success program. It starts the summer before you start law school. We have some pre-law seminars on how to prepare for class, how to read cases, how to brief cases, how to study, how to take a law school exam, how to do a law school outline. So those you can take before you even come into school. So then once you're there, after the first semester, students who are either from their grades, it appears, just kind of didn't get it the first semester, or students who just felt like they didn't get it, like, oh, my grades are okay, but I have no idea what's going on. So it's both by invitation and by application. There is a class, it's called Legal Fundamentals or something, that you can take for credit your second semester if you're like, yeah, it's just not coming together for me. Like I said, we invite students who it appears from their grades that it didn't come together, but also students can apply if they're just like, yeah, I just need a little more. We offer a similar class the second year, and then we also offer a similar class the third year. And then there are workshops in between about things to think about for the bar. BYU also has kind of an interesting little fund, too, that students who want to take a bar prep course who can't afford it, there is a subsidized loan fund that was created by a private donor at BYU that is just for bar prep. And so you can borrow the cost of your bar prep course. You can also borrow enough for a living stipend while you're studying for the bar, so you don't have to work while you study for the bar. And that, then you, of course, pay it back, after you pass the bar and start in practice. So that's kind of overview of the academic success program. Yes, sir?
Yeah, what funds are charging for bar review course?
Yeah, so Barbary, I think, is about $2,000 with all of their kind of like discounts and things like that. I mean, I think their sticker price is more than that, but when I talk to students, they're like, yeah, they told me if I signed up early, if I signed up on a Wednesday, I don't know.
If you sign up early,
then they give you,
then the increases,
you don't have to pay as it goes up. Yeah, so I think it's about $2,000 now, which is a lot of money. And a lot of students don't realize, it's just like the LSAT, they underestimate the amount of time it takes to study for the bar. And so, we encourage students, just take some time off and just study for the bar, because, you don't want to do it again. All right, other questions? Yes?
Is there a difference in either acceptance, placement, or competition, either in school or practice between males and females?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. So you're wondering if there's a difference between acceptance, placement, and what was the third thing? So as far as acceptance goes, it's all like the buckets and whatever. Now, I will say, BYU has a hard time, for some reason, getting women to apply. So we always have fewer women than men who apply. So the women are competing against fewer women, basically, for slots in the class. And while there's not like a preference for one gender, the preference is for a balanced class. Like that's the ideal, like half and half. But last year, the last year was the first time BYU had at least 50% women in an entering class. So this last group that just started was 42%, and the year before I think it was like 38%. So at this moment in time, there probably is an advantage if you're a woman applying to BYU Law. Again, not because we're like, oh, check, you get a plus or something. It's just there's fewer women who apply. So that's the first one. The next one, as far as like placement and jobs and competitions and all that, competitions straight up are merit, man. The best person wins. Male or female, the best brief, the best oralist, the best argument, whatever. Your clients want you to win. We want you to win. Doesn't matter. As far as placement goes, it's the same thing. I mean, somebody who's like in the top, 20% of the class or something, that's going to go a long way for employers because they're like, oh, law is an adversarial, competitive vocation. And yeah, if you were in the top of your class at this law school, great. So it doesn't really matter, like, who's good. But again, especially in Utah, there are fewer women that practice law. And I would hazard a guess, although I have never had a law firm tell me this, that it's probably easier to get a job as a female attorney because there are fewer of them. And there is a value of that diverse viewpoint. So again, it's not the 70s where I actually have a fun documentary called The First 100, the first 100 women lawyers. It took 100 years for 100 women to get admitted to the bar, from 1876 to 1976, okay? And so when I was on the board of Women Lawyers of Utah, we put together this documentary and interviewed some of the first 100. And wow, there were some amazing stories. So I'll just share one with you really fast, because I mean, even for the 70s, I was kind of appalled. So she said she graduated from University of Utah with a law degree, and she went to a firm who was advertising for a lawyer. And they brought her in, and they're like, we just have 3 questions for you. She's like, great. What is it? And they said, first, how fast can you type? She's like, I don't know how to type. And so then they said, where do you buy your clothes? She's like, at the store. And then they said, what form of birth control do you use? And she said, I've had a vasectomy. She didn't get the job, and she ended up being a very successful lawyer, law partner in Utah. But once upon a time, women were not really seen. It was hard to get a job as a woman lawyer. I mean, Sandra Day O'Connor had to work her first job after graduating top of her class, Stanford Law School. Her first job was unpaid because no one would hire her. You guys can watch RBG and see what happened to Ruth Bader Ginsburg when she was at Harvard Law School. It is not that way anymore. If that was what, I don't know if that's what you were really asking. It might have even swung the other way because there is this feeling that the diversity of viewpoint is valuable. Male, female, different socioeconomic groups, different ethnic groups, all of those viewpoints are valuable. All right, more questions? Yes?
So I've been looking a lot into your guys' Clark Scholar program.
Mm-hmm.
What do you guys look for in that exactly?
Well, the first thing is a high LSAT score, because the threshold to be considered as a Clark Scholar is a 165, right? So it's above our median. But that being said, last year we had 60 students that qualified just based on the LSAT threshold to be considered for the Clark Scholars Program. So for those of you who haven't read our website, the Clark Scholars Program is like our premier top scholarship program, where students receive not only full tuition, but they receive a $10,000 stipend per year as a living expense. They also receive an opportunity to go on a leadership study tour. We have one every year where we study a different leader, and then you get to read and study and meet about that leader and then go to where their stomping grounds are, basically. So this year it's going to be women's suffrage because of the anniversary of the 19th Amendment. Last year it was Thurgood Marshall, so it was civil rights. So the Clark Scholars, they have this all expenses paid opportunity to go on the study tour. There's also a board of Clark Scholars that works together. They do service projects at the law school. They organize their own speakers. They kind of are this Clark Scholar board that's supervised by one of our deans. And so it's a cool program, but it is very competitive. And as far as what we're looking for, the top, numbers are important, but then I just can't put a finger on like one thing, but all different things. I mean, we had one guy who was a professional engineer. He had I think like a 171 on the LSAT, like a 3.6 mechanical engineering, but he'd been working as an engineer for 5 years, and he had been a professional river guide for 6 years. How cool is that? It was really fun because his hair was like this long and his beard was like this long. And when I interviewed him, I'm just like, okay, you probably know like the BYU dress and grooming standards. He's like, I know if I get in, it's all coming off. I'm like, okay, I'm just saying, I love your beard, man, but you know, it's BYU. So I can't really tell you like the exact thing, but when I say do something and be awesome at it, I think the Clark Scholars are probably the ones that have shown that they are the super awesome at whatever it is that they do. But definitely academics holds, you know, a lot of weight. But we've got people who, you know, have military experience, really cool job experience, service. I mean, we had one guy that started his own nonprofit. I was just like, you know, there's just a lot of, you know, cure cancer. No, I'm just kidding. I'm astonished by some of the things. I just think, man, when I was at Utah State, I just wanted to graduate and get a job. You know, I wasn't involved in all of the awesome things that evidently people who want to go to law school nowadays are involved in. I wish I could tell you more, but we read all the applications, just kind of pick out the ones that are, you know, super exciting for whatever reason. And I will tell you one more thing about it, and then I'll get to this one. Students tend to think that there's this specific mold for the perfect law student. Political science, econ, you know, those are the philosophy, those are the majors, and they have most surely worked on, you know, the Hill, they've been like a page in the Senate or something, they've been in the pre-law society, okay, whatever. And that's all great stuff, but there are a lot of people actually that kind of fit that mold. And what makes law school really cool and interesting is people that are awesome at all different things. I mean, we have a guy that just started who was a Marine fighter pilot for 10 years, graduated top of his class at the Naval Academy like 15 years ago. And I'm like, and he didn't have like the highest LSAT score, but man, he impressed pants off of like the whole committee. They're like, whoa, check this guy out, whoa. You know, he flies like those Blue Angels planes. Like, he's super awesome. So, you know, we have one woman who was going to be a professional ballet dancer. She was in Ballet West's whole pre-professional program, but her dad was an engineer. When she came to BYU, she decided she wanted to be an engineer instead. So I've got like this quasi-professional ballerina who graduated from BYU in electrical engineering and likes to tell us any class she went to at BYU in engineering, they're like, hey, because she's tall, right, blonde, curly hair, they're like, hey, so this is engineering 506. Like, are you lost? Do you not know where? And she's like, yes, I'm here. Thank you. So, you know, just interesting, cool people. And you all are all unique and all different and have interesting, cool things about you. So when you put together your law application, show how awesome you are. Don't try to be like something that you think schools want. So that's important, okay? Now maybe you are super awesome political science, you have your own blog and you're like political guru, whatever, great. But just don't be that because you think that gets you into law school. So, okay, yes, sir.
Yeah, so just as a follow-up to the Clark Scholars question and then on the deans, which I think is kind of the tier below.
Yeah.
So with Clark, you select like 10 or 12. I was just curious how many you take every.
Yeah, so technically there are 12 Clark scholarships and we offer them, and whoever gets them, you know, we don't re-grant them, which we do with all of our other scholarships. So all of our other scholarships just go back in the pool and we keep granting them out, okay? The Clark Scholars are different. It's like a one-time thing. Because of that, we actually offer more than 12 because the folks that get the Clark Scholarship have lots of awesome options. The first time we did the Clark Scholarship, I think we had 8 because everybody's like, BYU's awesome, of course they'll want to come here. Well, no, they like want to go to Harvard and stuff too. And so we didn't have as many as we thought we would have. So the next year, I think we got 9, and then the next year we got 11. So we're like, okay, we figured out how many we have to select to get the number. And then we had almost all of them take them last year, so we had 17. So we didn't say, oh, just kidding, we only have 12. We're like, oh, yes, woohoo, now we have 17 Clark Scholars. So there's supposedly 12, but the number that get nominated and invited to the Clark Scholar events at the law school last year was 28, And of the 28, I think they offered 20 Clark scholarships and 8 Dean scholarships. And of the 20, 17 of them accepted. So I'm not sure if that's going to happen again. We'll see. But so that's kind of, you know, how that goes. The Dean scholarship, if you're nominated for a Clark scholarship and you're not selected through that process, but you come and you impress everybody at the law school, then you'd get offered a Dean scholarship, which is a $2,500 per year stipend. Of an early admission program, you have to have a complete application by I think February or January 6th, and then you have to decide by March 2nd, I think. I get all the dates confused because every year they're just like one off. But you have to withdraw your application to every other law school, which regular scholarships, you know, you'll have a bunch of scholarship offers from a bunch of different places, and you'll have until the seat deposit deadline in April or whatever to decide. Clark Scholars is an early admission, early decision program. And so there will be people who are offered full tuition scholarships, Dean scholarships outside of that, like early admission, you know, early decision program, and they will have until, you know, April or whatever to decide. But that's just done case by case.
Cool.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm really interested in your path to law school, and I'm wondering if you have any advice, like if you think you want to go to law school, just do it after undergrad, or if there's still like merit and value in
This is such a hard question. So for me, when I was in law school, I thought many times, wow, I have friends who go back to their apartments and study, and they don't have a husband there to, you know, talk to or cook for or take care of, and they don't have children that need them. Like, wow, that would have been pretty awesome. Like, I could have got the law school memo way earlier, and it would have been way easier. But that being said, there were just a lot of cool things I did before I went to law school. I taught high school for 4 years, and it was super fun, you know? And people are like, oh, you stand all this height. The high school students were really fun. The only people that were really annoying were like their parents. But generally speaking, the high school students were super awesome. And they were just fun and interesting. And so I don't regret like teaching school. I liked it. And then after I taught for 4 years, I quit because I had my first son. And then I worked part-time for the school district. I had 4 kids and went back to school during that time. And for me, after I got out of law school, I was really gung-ho to like work full-time and just go anywhere that my legal career could take me. And it just so happened that for me, my husband had become self-employed, and he was like flexible as far as, you know, kind of helping with the kids and whatever. And so for me, like that timing worked out great. One of my best friends in law school, she got married in law school and graduated, and she's went working at a big firm. She's got 2 kids. She works in Houston. She like appears in front of the Supreme Court, and I'm not kidding. She works in their Supreme Court appellate division, and, you know, flies to DC and all this stuff. And she'll call me sometimes, and she's like, whoa, this is like hard. And she's on a flex schedule, so she works 80% of the time and gets paid 80% of full time. Which is something that a lot of people of your generation are opting to do, both men and women, for different reasons. It used to be that if you were going to make it anywhere in the law, you really needed to blaze, you know, forward full time. And if you went part time, you kind of fell off that partnership track, or you wouldn't be promoted or whatever. But she goes into the office 1 day a week. She works from home the rest of the time. Now she has a full-time nanny who is there at her house with her kids during the day while she works there. And then in the evening, she doesn't work. Although, if she gets an email and she has to, you know, call a client or do something, she does. It's a demanding profession if you do that kind of law, you know? And so you kind of like, okay, well, when is that going to fit my schedule? I worked a lot of hours when I worked for a judge. I worked a lot of hours when I worked at a private firm. I know people who work part-time as an administrative law judge. They work for the government, you know, and they hear cases of people who own their own practice. They take as many or as few cases as they want to. One of the women who's the president of the J. Reuben Clark Law Society in Utah County, she's staying home with her kids right now. She was a prosecutor for 3 years and just decided, you know, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to step back. She does a little stuff on the side, you know. I think a legal degree is a fantastic degree for anybody, but I think it's a great degree for a parent. And you know stuff about how government works. You know stuff about how schools work, or they should work. And, you know the criminal justice system. I told my teenage son, I'm like, cops pull you over, and they're like, we want to search the car. Just say no. If you have probable cause, tell me what it is. You know? I mean, and it's not, I'm not trying to get him in trouble and be a smart aleck, but it's like you understand how the world works, which is really, really helpful. So I actually think it's amazing. It's not for everybody. It is 3 of the hardest years I ever had. I mean, I did a master's degree here in the evening while working part-time at the school district and having and raising 4 kids. You know, so I thought I could do busy. I quit my job. I went to law school. I just did law school full time. It was like the hardest thing I ever did. I was like, holy cow. But it's one of those things that you're like, I can do hard things. Oh! So that is very empowering. And I'm not going to lie. When people are like, oh, so what do you do? I'm like, I'm a lawyer. And I try not to be like, I'm a lawyer. You know, I'm just like, I'm a lawyer. And that feels pretty cool. So, but there are a lot more ways that you can use your law degree that's not straight up blazing through, but you need to kind of consider, you know, how much debt you go in and all of those kind of things. Did that answer your question? Kind of didn't, but.
Yeah, it's just hard to know, because I'm not like 100% committed to practicing law. I want to work in the government, and it's hard to know which advanced degree will get me where I want to go.
Yep. The nice thing about a law degree is there's a lot of things you can do with it. So I got my master's in education. There were a lot of things I could do, but you know, brokering real estate transactions wasn't one of them. But I could have been a prosecutor. You know, I could have been a healthcare lawyer. I could have worked at a tech company. And so there's just really a lot of different things you can do. My friend who is a prosecutor is actually working for a startup as like kind of their on-call in-house counsel, and just very part-time. So, but it is a big commitment. I'm not going to like go, oh yeah, just go to law school, no problem. That'll be just an easy 3 years, and then you can decide what you want to do. I wouldn't tell you that. But I wouldn't say just because you don't know what you want to do, it's off the table. Okay. And as long as these questions are of general interest, I'm happy to keep taking them. I'm also happy to say y'all can go do whatever you need to do, and then should we do that? Because I know people probably have class and stuff. No, I'm still here. I'm not leaving. Or if you all want to stay, you are all welcome to stay. I just don't want you to feel like, you know, like you're dismissed if you want. It doesn't hurt my feelings if you have to go. Okay, more questions. Okay, well, let's hear, because, you know, you've asked one.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
What do law schools think of W's in here?
Ah, very good question. So, first of all, I will say every law school has explaining anything that you think is a weakness in your application. If I just see like one W in an overall like strong transcript, I'm like, well, something happened, didn't want to take that class, or couldn't take that class, or took too many classes, or forgot when the drop deadline was, or something, you know. But, you know, I've seen transcripts that have lots of W's, that have, you know, lots of W's and lots of bad grades. And, you know, just a little explanation. I was, you know, this is what I was going through, this is what happened, and life happens, you know. People get divorced, people get terrible illnesses, loved ones die, you know. There's all kinds of terrible life things that happen. Just explain that. I have even like, all right, you can see my transcript is not awesome. Until I decided I wanted to be a lawyer, I had no direction at all. And I just didn't care. But, you know, I am now, as you will see, my last semester, I got a 4.0 because I'm serious about being a student now. Now that's a harder sell, but hey, you know, you ought to explain your 2.8 GPA and all of those mediocre grades if that's what they are. Fair enough? Yes, sir.
Being a tertiary other schools, there's a lot more concern about where you end your education when you started. So bad freshman year isn't necessarily a killer, but maybe a bad senior year might be.
Yeah, and a lot of it, you know, you can explain. If somebody you know, starts off kind of slow. I mean, if they've got like a 3.4, 3.5, and by the end they've got like a 3.9 or something, I don't even know if you need to explain that. It's just like some are hilarious. One guy, he failed every class his freshman year, like every single one. I think he got 1 B, and it was so funny. I'm not going to tell you where he went to school. It wasn't here, but he's like, you know, high school was really easy. And so I thought college would be really easy. So I had a full-time job, and I was kind of doing full-time college on the side. He said, and by midterm, when I was failing all of my classes, I was like, college is harder than I thought. He said, so I went to my academic advisor. I said, what should I do? And they're like, well, can you pass any of these classes? He's like, yeah, I think I can pass this one. They're like, just forget about the rest of them. Focus on that class. Do the best you can in that class. Just retake the rest of them. He's like, okay. So he did that. He retook all of them. Great. But when you apply, LSAC, the Law School Admissions Council, even if your school will replace the grades, if they are on the transcript, they will use both of them. So his all F's and 1 B, and then after that, like A's and everything, even retaking classes with A's, he had like a 2.8 GPA, poor guy. And so, you know, he was like, yeah, I was stupid, and then I wasn't, but there was nothing I could do about it. So exactly right. I mean, we love to see people who are like on an upward trend. But again, if there's something that happened or there's some reason, feel free to explain it. The admissions committee, we are human beings. Other questions? Did you have another one?
Yeah, so
okay.
I was just going to ask about like dual programs. Short questions, but do a lot of people do like a dual JD MBA at the Y? And if we're interested in doing something like that, do we talk to you, or is there a different
Yeah.
that you'd recommend?
So we actually have 5 approved joint degrees. Okay. So JD MBA, JD MAC, which is Masters of Accounting, JD MPP, Masters of Public Policy, MPA, Masters of Public Administration, and then the MEd, which is Masters of Educational Policy. So you have to get admitted to both programs independently. And so while I could kind of help you, you know, coordinate, okay, this is how the JD MBA looks. If the Marriott school doesn't accept you, you know, then you don't do the JD MBA.
Right.
But you also can apply like after in law school. Like you can go to your first year of law school and be like, whoa, I want to be a business lawyer, and I don't think my sociology degree prepared me for that, or whatever. You know, I want to do the JD MBA. You can apply, and if you get in, then you go do the MBA core for the next year, and then you split between the law school and the MBA school for the next 2 years. So they're all about 4 years. Okay. So it does kind of save you some time and some tuition if you do them together, but it's 1 extra year if you don't need it. You know, students who do the JD MBA really have some certain business focus. Maybe they're entrepreneurial, or they're not sure if they want to be a lawyer, like a business executive, but they think both things are valuable, which they are. The people who do the master's in accounting, they want to be tax lawyers, and that really gets them up into a higher pay grade with the master's of accounting and the JD. And so if there's something you're like, yeah, that's going to get me where I want to go, do it. But I wouldn't spend the extra year just to have more letters, yeah, after my name. So, yes, sir.
So if someone has like a high LSAT score, what would be like things that would keep them from being accepted?
Yeah, so this is a good question. So really, really bad grades and no explanation. Because it's one thing to come in and rock the LSAT. If you are consistently not a good student, you know, then the admissions committee would be like, man, you know, we actually have one student who dropped out of the law school who had a super high LSAT, was like in the 170s, and had a 2-point-something GPA, and just first hated law school because he thought it was too much work, and frustrated professors like crazy because he didn't like coming to class, didn't like doing the work. And in the end, it's just like, he just dropped out. And so some of the professors on the committee will be like, is this going to be another, you know, person's name, right? And then other things, like we had somebody who wrote a really scary personal statement. That's all I can say. It was scary. It was like, it was like in first person, but it couldn't be real because it was like, I am in prison, but I have done nothing wrong, you know? I was like, whoa. And there was like dates. It was like a journal entry. And it was like contemporary with when they submitted the thing. And at the very end of the personal statement, I heave my last breath, but my pen writes on. And I'm like, okay, well, you're not dead, because you want to come to law school. I mean, it was just scary. It was kind of this dark, brooding, like, you know, I don't know what. I actually interviewed this student because we interview anyone that we might consider admitting to law school. And I was like, you got to tell me about the personal statement. He's like, wasn't it obvious? It's like, no. He said it was my internal struggle with whether or not to go to law school. I'm like, okay. The committee was like, yeah, you know, you can go somewhere else. So there's just certain things, you know. We've gotten bad letters of recommendation. I got a letter that was like, so-and-so wants to go to law school. I'm afraid I cannot recommend this person. I'm like, oh, okay. I mean, who says that? Because nobody says that. We get a lot of bad letters in various stripes. We had a student whose father wrote his letter of recommendation, and it was actually bad. So he was trying really hard to be fair. I knew that's what he was doing. He's like, yes, this is my son, and yes, he works for me in my law firm. And, you know, I'm a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. Here's all the things he's awesome at. Here's all the things he's terrible at. You know, he's like, I don't want to show favoritism. I'm going to unvarnish. And it was bad. So bad letters, bad personal statement, bad grades. So like anything in that application, that holistic thing that the committee's like, You know, another school, we didn't get this one at BYU, but a student I went to a conference, and this was like, you know, the one that everybody held up. This student had a bunch of counts of vandalism. So in the character and fitness, they had written like, you know, vandalism, like 4 or 5 different times they had been arrested for vandalism. And then they wrote a paragraph explaining it. And they're like, this is what this is, this is what this is, this is what this is. And what I learned is that cops are idiots and don't have law degrees. You know, we don't say, oh, we want you representing our law school. We want to give a degree so that you're being our alum, because that's an awesome thing to say. So there's just crazy stuff that people do. So good question.